I have a treat especial for you today. But this is not it. This is the true piece de la resistance right here. This is a little brownie, Mossberg brownie. It's the first Mossberg that they ever made. Not this particular one, but this pistol was how Mossberg came to be. Then they got into shotguns and all that kind of stuff. But this little guy is taking us back into history. What is so special about this little kind of odd looking pistol? And if you don't think this is odd looking, I'm sorry, you just got some problems. Now, if you're familiar with the Brownie, you're going to notice that there are a few things missing and that there's some things that aren't quite right. But this little guy right here is a big piece of American firearms history and is a very important firearm. And you may have never even heard of it. Truthfully, I'd never heard of it until last Friday. I show up on the elk hunt. My uncle's coming from out of town and he's up there and he starts telling me this really cool story. So my wife's grandmother, it would have been his mother-in-law, had a dad who was a sheriff of Devil's Lake up in North Dakota. But he had pissed off a lot of people as a sheriff. He'd put a lot of bad people in jail and he had made a lot of enemies. And one thing he wanted to do is he wanted to make sure that his family was safe. And one of his kids happened to be my wife's grandma. So my wife's great-grandfather knew that if a bad guy was coming into the house, he's kind of looking around and he's trying to assess where the biggest danger lies. One of the entry points that was highly likely would have been his 6-year-old daughter's bedroom. So he knew he would not always be there to be able to protect her and that she needed a way to protect herself. Now, she was a 6-year-old little girl. What do you have her do? Well, the obvious choice, right? You give her a little pocket pistol and you teach her how to use it. Well, sort of, kind of like that. What he did is he had this Brownie. What they wouldn't know was that this thing was inoperable. It's broken, it looks like it had been dropped, and that pieces have broken off and no longer truly functional. But he gave her this gun, knowing that it didn't work, also knowing that this nasty little barrel pointed at a bad guy would help to dissuade them. Now, this has been in my wife's uncle's care for quite a few decades, and he has kept and preserved it within the family. He shared this story with me. After he was done, he pulled this gun, wrapped in this cloth right here out of his pocket, unwrapped it, and it was the first time I had ever laid eyes on this. So I get to be the caretaker of this and pass this along when the time is right to the right person in the family who will care for it, cherish it, and truly value its internal history. When I first got this, I actually made a video, but I had to make a lot of assumptions on it, and I really didn't know anything about it. I was up on the mountain, had no way to research it. One of the assumptions I had made was right here. You can see how this barrel closes and you have these two little lugs up here. If you take a look at this, you can see where that metal has broken. It's not cut. You can also see where this lug right here is dented, and you can see it's not in pristine condition. This is around 100 years old, most likely, but in most cases it actually has really nice finishing over it. You can still even see a little bit of blue on this trigger. Most everything is finished pretty nicely. You can see on the frame, you can see some mill marks. It's a little bit rougher where the hand grip is covering up most of it, but overall, really nice fit and finish, especially if it was working, right? If I hold that together, and actually that trigger is pretty smooth. It's not a light trigger pull by any means, but it's a great trigger pull for a pocket pistol with no safety. Now you take this out like this, and that trigger is ultra smooth. It's like a really nice 1911 trigger, but then again, it's not trying to engage anything. But a big old thick piece of steel right there for a trigger. You don't see that anymore. Then it engages in here and somehow makes everything work inside there. You got the business end right here, and right back in here at the breech, you see where you can load in those 4 rimfire rounds. The thing I noticed at first is there is no ejector to get these out, and it doesn't look like it's missing, it's just not there. I assumed you must have to have a little rod. You fire it, and then you hope you took care of business. And then when you get home, you take a rod and pop those shells out. Doing a little bit of research on it, I realized there's this little hole up here. But for like 38 bucks, something like that, I can buy this little piece of sheet metal that slides down there that is built to the same specs that the original was. You've got this firing pin right here, and you can see that it's round, and so that enables that thing to spin around. It's a rotating striker fired pistol. Now you can see the Brownie name right there. I'm gonna make an assumption on this. Browning was such a popular name in firearms. I have a feeling that that was trying to play on the Browning name a little bit. That is just my own personal assumption. I can't confirm that. OF Mossberg and Sons, New Haven, Connecticut, USA. I don't know what the F stands for, but the O stands for Oscar. He'd worked for and with a couple other gun makers, and then him and his sons, they went on their own. And this was their first firearm. They designed it in 1919, I believe. They started selling them in 1920, and they sold through 1932. They don't know exactly how many were made, and this one is serial numbered. There's about 30,000, so, but there's no real records of it, so won't be able to determine an actual age for this just based on that. But for the most part, there's three main variants, and this is the last variant. Just a shot in the dark. This is probably mid to late 20s when this was made. These grips are the original grips. If you are a Brownie aficionado, you're gonna notice that right here, you've got some little bastardization going on. You've got this screw in the center of these grips that actually doesn't belong. The grips of all the photographs I've seen of the originals is just here at the bottom. So my guess is this is shooting these grips kind of loosened up. They did a little bit of farmer engineering right there, and they strapped in a little bolt and a little square nut. But not to be outdone, they even took on that square nut and kind of notched it to make it look a little nicer. Now right here you've got these serrations, and if you hit that, it raises the barrel latch right here, or was, right? This is just partially there. So with that pin right there, I don't know what that pin's for. I haven't ever taken this thing apart, but that pin right there indicates that this is a newer variant than the two others. Also, you have the July 27th patent date. Variant number 2 is actually the most desirable and most collectible because I think it was one of the shorter runs. On the second variant, they accidentally put this through and it was saying January 27th, 1920 for the patent date. On the first variant, it says patent applied for. The sight is very rudimentary, and then if you notice, it's not in line with any of the barrels. This truly is a close range belly gun, but this wasn't even marketed as a self-defense gun. But truthfully, it probably was carried by quite a few people just for that reason. And then you have this groove that comes down this latch right here and a nice little notch. So you just line the sights up right there. When this thing first came out, it was $5. And it was marketed as a gun for trappers. That way you could load this thing up. If you had an animal in the trap, you could just go close range, go take care of business. Just a little no fuss gun. And it gives you that same reliability that you find in a revolver, where if you have a misfire, especially with rimfire ammunition, but if you have a misfire, all you've got to do is keep pulling the trigger. I think we need to take this thing apart.